I would like to call the meeting to order and welcome everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to our first joint meeting of both Assembly and Senate committees on legislative operations and elections. We are glad to welcome members of the Senate that are joining us today. Our two committees actually have the coveted luxury of being scheduled to meet within a half hour of each other. So we are able to take advantage of our scheduled time and join and have joint committees when appropriate. So we thought for the first few committee meetings that will be primarily presentations that I think we all understand the benefit to all of us, including our presenters, to being able to join together. So before I go any further, I would like to invite my fellow chair on the Senate side, Senator Orenshall, who is also chair of legislative operations and elections on the Senate side, if you would like to make any opening remarks.
Well, I want to thank Chairwoman Miller and all the members of your committee. You know, it was a real honor to get to serve on that committee in the past. I was able to chair that committee too, and I appreciate all the good work that your committee does, and I'm really glad we can work together and try to hear some of these presentations together. I hope we can have more joint sessions in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Madam Secretary, please call the roll for the members of the Senate and then the Assembly Committee members.
Senator Buck.
Here.
Senator Cannizzaro. Senator Lang.
Here.
Senator Severs-Gansert.
Here.
Chair Orenshall.
Here.
Assemblywoman Dickman.
Here.
Assemblyman Frierson.
Here.
Assemblywoman Gonzalez.
Here.
Assemblywoman Howdegi.
Here.
Assemblyman Levitt.
Here.
Assemblyman Matthews. Assemblyman MacArthur.
Here.
Assemblywoman Monroe Moreno.
Here.
Assemblywoman Thomas.
Here.
Assemblywoman Torres.
Here.
Chair Miller.
Here. And if we have any members that are not here, please mark them present when they arrive. Again, I'd also extend a welcome to those viewing the meeting online and those participating by phone and video. Before we continue, I'd like to address a few housekeeping items. Again, committee members, please remember to have your cameras on during the course of the meeting, and feel free to, when it's appropriate time to ask a question or make a comment, that if you would want to wave your hand or send me a message on chat to do that to be recognized. For members of the public, if you wish to provide public comment, please make sure that you pre-register online through the link provided in this agenda for today's meeting. Registration when the agenda is posted to the Nevada Legislature's website. And upon registration, you will receive a telephone number, meeting ID, and the instructions for joining the meeting. So that we ensure that we have accurate records of everyone participating, we ask that you don't share that information, but encourage anyone else you know that wants to participate to register individually online. For anyone testifying, we will ask that you unmute and to speak, and then again, mute to listen. As with everyone participating, we ask that you make sure that your cell phones and other devices are turned off, or the volume turned off, so that it's not a distraction. With that, we will go ahead and move to the next agenda item, which is our presentations. Our first presentation today begins with a presentation from the Secretary of State. Later, we will hear from the Nevada Commission on Ethics. So first, I'd like to welcome our presenters from the Secretary of State, which is Nevada Secretary of State, Barbara Zagaski, and Deputy Secretary of State for Elections, Mark Lishin. I believe I said that right. Please correct me if I didn't. And one question that I do have for our presenters is would you like to go through the entire presentation before we stop and ask questions, or would you like us to ask questions throughout?
If we could do the presentation, Madam Chair, that would be very, very good.
Okay, that's what we'll do, Secretary. Thank you.
Okay. Well, good afternoon, Chair Orenshaw and Chair Miller, and members of both committees. For the record, I am Nevada Secretary of State Barbara Zagaski, and it is a pleasure to be here today. And present with me today are my Chief Deputy Scott Anderson and Elections Deputy Mark Volashin. It does look like it starts with a W, but it's pronounced with a V, so it's Volashin. And we are happy to give you an overview of the Secretary of State's office and its role in the Nevada elections. And I wanted to reassure you that our elections are always conducted in accordance with all federal and state laws. As I have stated on numerous occasions, we take every election integrity violation complaint seriously and investigate all allegations. But to this day, we have seen no evidence of widespread voter fraud or voting machine errors in Nevada. I highlighted that because during the next 116 days, there will be many discussions about the future of Nevada's elections. And if you have questions, please let us know. We have a facts versus myth document on our website that you may find helpful to provide clarity. It's located on nvsos.gov. The link is in the top banner. My staff and I will remain available to provide any information that may help facilitate your discussions about Nevada's election laws and encourage you to include our office in any election-related discussions. The Office of Secretary of State is one of the original constitutional offices established in the Nevada Constitution and is responsible for maintaining the official records of the acts of the legislature and the executive branch. Additional duties have been added over time and range from the Chief Officer of Elections to Registrar of Business Entity Filings to Administrator of the Uniform Securities Act. The Office of the Secretary of State is organized into 8 main divisions. We have elections, which everybody knows the most. We have commercial recordings, securities, notary, special projects, which include managing document preparation services, domestic partnership, Nevada Lockbox, Business Portal, Executive Administration, and Operations Division. Additionally, as part of the Election Integrity Task Force, we do work closely with numerous federal and state law enforcement agencies. Our main offices are located in Carson in the Capitol Building, the Myers Annex across the street, and the Blaisdell Building. We also have an office in City Hall Building in North Las Vegas. And I would like to now turn the presentation over to Mark Volashin, my Deputy for Elections, for the remainder of the presentation. Thank you to the Chair Orenshaw and Chair Miller.
Good afternoon, Chair Orenshaw and Chair Miller and committees. My name is Mark Volashin, and I am the Deputy Secretary of State for Elections. Over the next 33 slides, I will cover the Secretary of State's Elections Division, our roles and responsibilities, and information about past and ongoing projects. NRS 293.124 directs the Secretary of State to act as Chief Officer of Elections for the state and makes her responsible for the execution and enforcement of the provisions of Title 24 of NRS and all other provisions of federal and state law relating to elections in this state. Established to assist her in these duties, the Elections Division consists of 15.5 positions. These positions include 11 full-time equivalent positions, 2 of which are currently vacant and frozen, 4 contractors, and 1 part-time compliance investigator who also supports the office's Commercial Recordings Division. Of note, 5 of our current employees are veterans, but all of us are united in our dedication to our integrity and strict adherence to the elections processes prescribed by federal and state law. We also work closely with 8 positions in the office's Securities Division and the Elections Integrity Task Force, which is made up of a number of federal and state law enforcement agencies to address violations of elections law. As of February 1st, 2021, there were approximately 1.8 million active registered voters in Nevada, with roughly an additional 200,000 inactive voters. It is important to clarify what that means. To be an active registered voter simply means that we have verified the address for these voters. An inactive voter means that we have received a returned piece of elections mail that was identified as being undeliverable, or a voter has failed to respond to a confirmation notice from the county clerk. In fact, it is possible to be an active voter without having voted in the past decade. It is also possible to be an inactive voter, but then go to the polls on election day, provide an updated address, reclaim your active status, and vote. Turning to our elections in 2020, here you will see statistics relating to voter turnout during the 2020 primary election, contrasted with those from the 2018 primary. You'll notice that our overall turnout for 2020 was high for a primary election, with almost 30% turnout despite the pandemic. Voter turnout for the 2020 general election was also higher than in years past. This highlights how effective our current state laws are at facilitating and encouraging voters to vote in a manner they choose and are comfortable with, even during a pandemic. Election day voter turnout fell approximately 50% because of such a large number of voters voted by mail and because of turnout during early voting. A further analysis of voter turnout over the last 20 years indicates a continuing trend away from election day voting and towards early and mail-in ballot voting. In 2020, this was at least partly due to the passing of AB 4, which, due to the governor's declaration of emergency, directed that a mail-in ballot be sent to every active registered voter. Another big influence on voter turnout during this election was the implementation of same-day voter registration, as prescribed by AB 345 from the 2019 legislative session. The statistics on the bottom of this slide show that more than 60,000 voters chose to either initially register to vote or to update their voter registrations on the same day they voted. Automatic voter registration was enacted by the voters in 2018 and further prescribed by AB 345. It was implemented in January 2020. It resulted in the registration of eligible voters through automated processes which conducting specific transactions at the Department of Motor Vehicles. The process also identifies individuals not eligible and filters them out. No further enhancements or progress has been made since the initial implementation due to budget reductions and the COVID-19 pandemic. The most significant impacts to the 2020 general election came from Assembly Bill 4 of the 32nd special session, which required the distribution of mail-in ballots to all active registered voters. We saw the impact on voter turnout in the previous slides, but we'll need to wait to see if this mandated exposure to mail-in ballots is something Nevada voters continue to request in future elections. While the last bullet identifies that 37% of the mailed out ballots were actually returned, this represented a full 48% of the total ballots cast during the 2020 general election. The requirement to mail ballots cost taxpayers approximately $2.6 million, or roughly $1.46 per ballot. It is also important to note that the impacts of AB4 were not limited to the 2020 general election alone. The upcoming Boulder City election has also been identified as an affected election and will require the same distribution of mail-in ballots to all voters, as well as any future election deemed an affected election due to a declared state of emergency. We have also identified that the process by which the county clerks conduct voter registration and list maintenance needs to be better explained to the general public. This process is mandated by a combination of federal and state laws. As it currently stands, the Elections Division receives information from the agencies listed on the slide, and we in turn provide that information to the county clerks, who then act upon that information. It happens this way because the voter registrations are maintained in each county. As such, Nevada's system is considered a bottom-up system. We're currently in the process of transitioning to a top-down system, where the voter registrations will be centralized with the state. Once this system is completed, the office will be able to play a much more active role in list maintenance. During the 2020 general election cycle, We also conducted a pilot program of a risk limiting audit. This pilot program was required by Senate Bill 123 of the 2019 legislative session. A risk limiting audit is an additional process used to validate that the machines used during the election accurately report the votes cast. We conducted a pilot program using 4 counties for the 2020 general election, which will aid us in developing our regulations prior to the 2022 election cycle. We are also conducting a risk limiting audit during the Boulder City primary and general elections in early 2021. Shifting slightly, the following slides describe some of the agency's elections-related websites and provide context about them. First up is silverstateelection.nv.gov, which is our website for reporting election night and official results. The statistics from the site indicate a few things. First, significantly more users came to the site in 2020 than in 2018, indicating that the office continues to be recognized as the trusted source for elections results. Second, the peak in website traffic did not occur until 2 days after the election. This reflects the reality that in most cases, our contests were not decided by election night, and that additional ballots still needed to be counted pursuant to state law. This slide shows the statistics from 2020 compared to the statistics from the 2016 election, reinforcing the same points as before. This is another of our websites that voters found quite useful during the 2020 election cycle. Registered Voter Services, available through the nvsos.gov site, provides a number of useful resources to voters. This is an integral part of the agency's effort to enable voters to make choices based on their preferences and needs. The Nevada Online Voter Application, or NOVA, located at registertovotnv.gov, is the application through which eligible citizens are able to register to vote. Since its creation in 2010, more than 787,000 individuals registered online. Of note, the eligibility of these individuals was automatically verified by the DMV and Social Security Administration. Here are the online registration statistics for the 2020 election cycle on the top, and specific to just the 2020 general election at the bottom. These numbers highlight the importance of offering this online service for new registrations and for updates, which help voters maintain the accuracy of their voter registration and their status as an active voter. The Effective Absentee System for Elections, or EASE, is an online system for the several thousand Nevadans who are currently serving in the military or who are living overseas. Federal laws provide voting protections for uniformed service members, their family members, and citizens residing outside the United States. EASE enables them to register to vote, request the ballot, and to send an encrypted file to their county clerk that indicates for whom they would like to vote. More than 1,200 individuals were able to vote during this election cycle using the EASE system. In April of 2020, EASE was expanded to allow its use by Nevada residents with disabilities. 93 Nevadans with disabilities were able to take part in the election using EASE, and we anticipate that number to grow for future election cycles. Election security is increasingly complex. Fortunately, we are part of a strong network of organizations dedicated to ensuring fair and secure elections. The Elections Integrity Task Force is a critical part of our effort to ensure the security of our elections. Comprised of a number of federal and state law enforcement agencies, the Elections Integrity Task Force formally meets and collaborates each election, with all members maintaining routine and clear lines of communication between elections, sharing best practices, threat warnings, and new developments. Recognizing that our websites are vital to Nevada voters, our office fosters a culture of cybersecurity. This cultural mentality reinforces best practices, stresses the need for constant vigilance, and promotes a keen awareness of the potential impacts of the current cybersecurity environment. To this end, we allocate resources to address both the cyber and physical security requirements needed to ensure fair and safe elections, and to ensure the security of all Secretary of State systems. We request and use grants to enhance our security. We have joined organizations that share election-specific security information, including the Elections Infrastructure Information Sharing and Analysis Center, or EISAC, and the National Association of Secretaries of State, and work with numerous state and federal agencies. Doing so has ensured that we are staying on the cutting edge of election security and has helped us administer with the EISAC and Elections Infrastructure Government Coordination Council, or EIGCC, called the most secure election in American history. That is not to say there were not threats to our election. I want to highlight that we identified record attempts by domestic and foreign actors to disrupt our websites and services. To be clear, these efforts were not focused on our voting machines, which are standalone or air-gapped units not connected to the internet, but instead were efforts to interfere with or degrade our online services that I described before. You can see from this slide that just one of our numerous security technologies blocked more than 5,800 malicious actions in just a 3-month period. These attacks did not start on election day, nor did they stop once the election was certified. And while many of these attacks originated overseas, most came from within the borders of the United States. This level of protection could not have been possible without the partnership of the Elections Integrity Task Force and our federal and state partners I mentioned earlier. The Help America Vote Act is another major part of our effort to ensure election security. Our HAVA administrator has her hands full ensuring that we effectively manage these federal grants in a manner that will continuously enhance voter access and election security. We will be using the 2020 HAVA grant to partially pay for our project to transition to a top-down voter registration program. We also received $4.5 million in coronavirus aid, relief, and economic security, or CARES Act funds, to assist in the administration of the 2020 election cycle. During the primary election, for example, we used CARES Act funds to pay for a statewide voter education program and other supplies and equipment. As for the machines we use to vote, here are some of the main types used across Nevada. All of them are air-gapped or not connected to the internet, and all use a voter-verified paper audit trail, or VVPAT, which enables an in-person voter to confirm the accuracy of their ballot before casting that ballot. Nevada's voting machines were recently updated too, courtesy of $8 million provided by the 2017 legislature. The updated equipment was first used during the 2018 election cycle with much success. Our voting machines and systems are certified by the office with assistance by the Gaming Control Board. The next 3 slides describe applications and programs that also help facilitate or educate the public about Nevada's elections. The first is Aurora, an application that enables the mandated filing of campaign finance documents. This site is used by candidates to file contributions and expenses reports, as well as enabling the public full transparency into candidate finances. Senate Bill 557 of the 2019 legislative session revised the requirements for campaign finance reporting. These changes went into effect on January 1st of 2020. There was a reduction in fines collected during the 2020 election cycle. We attribute this higher level of compliance due to a more determined outreach program instituted by the Elections Division. We also provide a service to future voters. The student mock election is conducted during every election cycle with the purpose to inform students about the voting process and the importance of their right to vote. Unfortunately, there was a significant drop in involvement this year, likely due to the pandemic and subsequent transition from in-person learning to online classes. Nonetheless, we will continue to offer this program and will identify methods to improve the outreach to and the experience of participants. These last slides are specific to the current session. First, an update on the status of the initiatives and referendums. There were 2 constitutional amendments that were deemed insufficient when signature gathering attempts were abandoned due to COVID-19 restrictions. There were 4 initiatives to amend statutes. 2 were deemed sufficient and 2 were deemed insufficient. The 2 that were deemed sufficient have been delivered to LCB staff as required. The updated requirements for initiatives and referendums are shown on this slide. These are the due dates and signature requirements for initiative or referendum petition to be deemed sufficient. There are, as of our last count, 27 elections-related BDRs. These BDRs cover a wide range of topics. It should be noted that in addition to the changes that will result from this session, there's already a major elections bill going through Congress right now. If passed, House Resolution 1 or HR 1 will have a number of major impacts on Nevada elections. We will monitor HR 1 closely for any such impacts. Looking to the future, there are a number of projects underway that will further enhance the security, fairness, and transparency of our elections.
Thank you very much, Deputy Voloshin. And I'd like to thank the legislature for their continued support during this and previous election cycles. This concludes our presentation, and we look forward to any questions or comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Secretary Zagaski and Deputy Secretary Voloshin. First, we know that there wasn't a process, a system, an industry, a service that wasn't impacted due to COVID. And yet, again, the response and the efforts from your office were definitely recognized. So thank you for that and for the presentation.
Thank you much, Chair Miller.
Thank you. I know that I anticipate some questions from members, so I would like to open it up to questions. Senators and Assembly members, if you have any questions. Let's start with Chair Renshaw, please.
Thank you, Chair Miller. And thank you, Madam Secretary, and thank you, Chief Deputy, for the presentation. I appreciate how hard you worked during the last year, during the pandemic, trying to make sure that people could exercise their right to vote and participate in our democratic institutions. So thank you for all the hard work and having to be so flexible and move so quickly. Two questions I have. The full provisional ballots that we instituted this year, I know there was a lot of worry about making that work, and I just wondered how the Secretary's office and the registrars found that worked, and then the transition to a top-down voting system. Through the years, we've heard that will really solve a lot of problems, and I wondered how far off in the horizon do you think we are to getting to that top-down system, and what kind of problems do you think that will solve once we have that?
Well, first of all, thank you, Senator Orenshaw, for your comments, and we really appreciate the opportunity to answer the questions. I'm going to let my deputy, Mark Voloshin, answer those two questions because he's the one in the trenches. And so he'll be able to answer that for you. Go ahead, Mark.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Senator Orenshaw, thank you for the questions, first and foremost. To make sure I have them right, first question is about provisional ballots and how that process went. I think the bottom line and the big takeaway from the provisional ballots is that it did add a little bit of stress and confusion, not so much to the clerks who were aware of it and expecting it, but really to the public and understanding the impacts of the additional timelines required so that as these provisional ballots were cast, recognizing that we needed to hold on to them and make sure that the individuals were qualified, eligible to vote, that they hadn't registered in another county or state, or had to maybe even tried to vote in another state or county. That added a little bit of friction to it. But in regards to the processing of the provisional ballots themselves, from a purely technical standpoint, there were not significant issues that I had heard about at any rate. In regards to the transition to the top-down voter registration system that we mentioned earlier during the presentation, there's a few factors that I would like to bring to your attention. First, to answer you up front, the timeline. This is something that unfortunately is not going to be quick. We've discussed this process and a transition to this sort of top-down registration system with numerous other states to learn some of their lessons. And one of the things they continue to repeat is do not rush the process. Do not assume that you can do this within a year or so. The goal is the 2024 or 2026 election cycles, but a lot of that's going to be contingent upon the process as we work through it. The first step in the process that is underway currently, at least we're developing the RFP for it, is to have an assessment done. We're looking to have somebody examine our state system and resources to see if is it make more sense to use a commercial off-the-shelf program, a proprietary system that we develop internally, potentially some sort of hybrid. So there's a number of factors that we're looking at in making sure that we collect and capture and meet all of the county and state requirements. So again, to your timeline, again, a few years at the very least, but it is something that we're doing methodically and carefully in conjunction with not only the county clerks and registrars, but numerous other stakeholders to make sure it's done properly the first time, recognizing that there is absolutely zero tolerance for this to go wrong as we move into another election cycle, whenever that may be.
Thank you, Chief Deputy. Thank you, Madam Secretary. Thank you, Chair Miller.
Thank you, Chair Ornshaw. I think next on the list for a question is Senator Buck.
Thank you, Chair Miller. I had just a couple of questions. Has Clark County Election Department released the list of who received the mail-in ballots?
Thank you for the question, Senator. Your question is, has Clark County submitted a list of who has received the ballots or just the numbers or I guess?
Usually we're able to see who's received the ballots, and that is not viewable now.
Interesting. I was not aware of that. I'll look into that and get an answer to you as soon as possible.
Thank you. Also, do you know how many mail-in ballots you sent to the post office flagged, like for vacant addresses or?
Senator, yes, I do. In fact, I have that information right here in front of me. From the 2020 general election, the number of mail ballots that were returned as undeliverable or a bad address across the state was 118,524. That's 118,524.
Okay, does that conclude your question, Senator Buck?
I believe so. Thank you so much. Thank you, Chair Miller.
You're welcome. Thank you. We have an additional question from Chair Ornshaw.
Thank you very much, Chairwoman Miller. And I think my question's to the Chief Deputy, and I'm not sure if this data is available. Maybe it's something I should circle around with you offline, but for people who voted by mail and there was an issue with their ballot, maybe signature didn't match or something was wrong, and there was an effort to contact those people to try to get them to cure the problem with their mail ballot. Is there any data as to how that compares to the normal absentee ballot process? Were more ballots not accepted? And I mean, that's kind of the worry to me. And was the process the same, trying to cure those mail ballots now if a signature didn't exactly match, from just trying to reach out to those voters versus the normal absentee process in the past? And if that data is not available, I can circle back with you offline and get that.
Chair Ornshaw, thank you for the question. I do have the information in front of me regarding to how many mail-in ballots required a signature cure, as well as how many we were not able to cure through the routine processes. In regards to your comparison, though, I will have to get back to you about that, comparing the process from the 2020 election cycle to previous mail-in ballot election cycles and those results. Are you interested with it? That'd be helpful to have the information now that I have in front in regards to the total numbers projected. And
if I could, yes, thank you.
Certainly. Of the mail-in ballots that we sent, 12,584 required a signature cure, which is approximately 1.8% of the mail-in ballots that we sent out during the 2020 general election. Of those, 2,887 we were unable to get cured. That's 2,887 we were unable to get cured. And Chair Ornshaw, as I mentioned, I will follow up with you to compare that to other previous election cycles.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you, Chief Deputy. Thank you, Chairwoman Miller.
Absolutely, Chair. Thank you. We have a question from Assemblywoman Dickman.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. I just have a question. I mean, we seem to have a real issue with cleaning up our voter rolls in our state. And I was wondering if anyone could explain what happened with the Clark County inactive voters who remained on the mail list because of missing the deadline for removing them after the primary?
Thank you for the question, Assemblywoman. The bottom line is that we missed the 90-day blackout. There's a federal law requiring all voter registration list maintenance to end 90 days prior to any election, any federal election. That maintenance was done, unfortunately, 2 or 3 days after that blackout, which is why it had to be reversed to make sure that those names were on the lists and then received ballots as they previously would have been.
Follow up, Madam Chair?
Yes, please.
So what caused that delay?
Assemblywoman, I don't have those details in front of me. I would have to confer with the registrar of voters in Clark County to find out the specific details. I will do so and get back to you in a timely manner.
Great, thanks. I think it's really important to have that information. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. And Deputy, I'd also like to request that any information, again, that you send to our committee staff so that we can disseminate it to members of both committees.
Absolutely, Chair Miller.
Thank you. With that, we have a question from Senator Lang.
Thank you, Chair Miller. My question is, when we transition to a top-down system, will we get our results of the elections in a more timely manner?
Thank you, Senator Lang, for the question. In regards to the top-down system, that actually will not affect the timelines associated with the election. There are numerous things that a top-down voter registration system will help, but the current statutes are what drive provisional ballots. The fact, for example, that mail-in ballots can be postmarked on election day, that mandates a certain amount of time after the election to allow those ballots to come in, then allow us to process it. So there will still be a delay. It will likely be a day or two faster in regards to our ability to compare the provisional ballots against others to make sure that, again, nobody is registered twice. That process will go a little bit faster, but there will still be a delay and the results will not be certified on election night.
May I have a second question?
Yes, Senator.
Thank you, Chair Miller. My second question is, what other states around us have a top-down system? Does California have a top-down?
Thank you for the question, Senator. It's my understanding that we're one of 4 states in the union who do not have a top-down voter registration system. I will confirm that, though, and include that in my information that I provide to the staff.
Thank you, and thank you, Chair Miller.
You're welcome. And I'd also just like to let all the members of both of our committees know that we actually will have presentations from the election officials on Tuesday. So if there's some of these specific questions that you may have that are more specific to the elections, that they may be more appropriate to answer and respond to on Tuesday, so that you know that's ahead. I will take one final follow-up question from Senator Buck.
Thank you, Chair Miller. I guess I can ask again on Tuesday when we reconvene, but I just wondered, when I was out knocking on doors in the campaign, I'd come across, asking for a voter, and then the voter had passed away, and it was a little awkward. And so that's what I was wondering, like is there a statute or is there something that is done to make sure that you compare or verify when somebody has passed away, like through the Social Security Administration or somewhere, so that they are removed from the voter rolls?
Thank you for the question, Senator. Again, apologies. Mark Voloshin, Deputy Secretary of State for Elections, for the record. Senator, your question is ultimately about list maintenance in the process. And I think to answer you directly, yes, we do coordinate with the Bureau of Vital Statistics and Social Security Administration, the DMV, to get the information about individuals across the state who are deceased, so we can remove them from the voter rolls. That is a process. It's one of many that are part of our list maintenance process. I find that folks get surprised in some cases when we tell them that list maintenance is an ongoing, constant process. In fact, we did it last night. We do it every night, in fact. There's a number of agencies that provide information to us. We take that information, we make sure that we get it to the counties, and then they're able to act on it. There's other processes, including our, again, involvement with the ERIC program, the Electronic Registration Information Center, where they send us information every other month that also, again, includes some of that information. So there are numerous ways that we get this information. As you had mentioned, there are clearly indications that there are people or individuals who are getting through the cracks somehow. That is something that the Secretary has asked us to look very critically at and see if there's not, again, a means for us to improve or somehow ensure that our list maintenance is being done properly and as thoroughly and effectively as it needs to be.
Thank you, Deputy. Thank you, Chair Miller, so much. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. And with that, I don't see any other questions right now from any committee members. So again, I'd like to thank Secretary Zagaski and Deputy Volashin for your presentation and for joining us today. And with that, I will close this agenda item as we move on to one.
Thank you, Chair Miller.
Thank you. Our next agenda item is we will have a presentation from the Nevada Commission on Ethics. We are pleased to have Executive Director Yvonne Navarez-Goodson and Commission Counsel Tracy Chase. And so I will, as you are, I'll give you a moment to prepare to present, but I will ask the same question. Do you prefer that we wait until the end of your presentation questions, or are there certain segments within your presentation that you would stop and like us to ask?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Are you able to hear me?
I am, yes.
Terrific. Thank you. This is Yvonne Navarez-Goodson for the record. I think I'm happy to take questions if something comes up in the middle of the presentation, but otherwise I think it'll be a fairly brief overview, and I'd be happy to take questions at the end.
Okay, then why don't we do this, because you know your presentation the best, that at certain where you feel it's an appropriate section, that if you stop and notify us that you're ready to take questions, we can proceed that way.
You bet. I would be happy to do that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you again, Madam Chair, also Chair Orenshaw and members of both committees. It's my pleasure to present to you today an overview of the Nevada Commission on Ethics and the Ethics in Government Law. I'd like to also introduce to you today our Commission Counsel, Tracy Chase. Tracy Chase has been with the Commission now for a little over 6 years. And the reason for me embellishing a little bit on my introduction of Commission Counsel Chase is that I wanted to introduce her because I've decided to take another position. And so I'm only going to be with the Commission now for approximately another week. And Tracy will become the face of the Commission in terms of any interaction she might have with the legislature, including any bill presentations that the Commission expects to put forward. So I can't speak Tracy's praises enough. She's super tremendous. She's really competent and professional and has an utmost knowledge about the Commission's history and also where we're expecting to go and hope to go with the legislature's input. And with that, Madam Chair, I'd like to provide in today's presentation a general overview of the Nevada Commission on Ethics, including sort of where we came from, why do we have ethics law in general, and where the Commission stands now with our existing sort of caseload and where we hope to go this session with the insights of our colleagues and legislators here in both of these committees. And so to jump off here, the Nevada Commission on Ethics is an 8-member public body. Its members are half appointed by the governor and half appointed by the Legislative Commission. The members of the commission, much like all other public officers in the state, are subject to the very ethics law that they govern. And so the idea in the creation of the Ethics Commission was political neutrality. And in that vein, not more than 4 members of the commission can be members of the same political party. The idea was that they would not be able to be actively involved in political campaigns or political activities. And they also must have some diversity of residency throughout the state. So we have no more than 4 members from any one county in this state. We have approximately 145,000 public officers and public employees throughout the state. And with that general jurisdiction in mind, we have 6 full-time staff members here at the commission, including myself, the commission counsel. We have an associate counsel, investigator, paralegal, and an executive assistant. The entire role of the Nevada Commission on Ethics is essentially to interpret and enforce the Nevada Ethics and Government Law, which is set forth in NRS Chapter 281A. Primarily, that chapter governs conflicts of interest for public officers and public employees. A little bit of history about why we exist at all. Where did ethics laws even come from? And the real history and where Nevada's ethics law derived from was the aftermath of the Watergate scandal in the 1970s. As a result of that scandal in the 1970s, the federal government got together and enacted the Ethics and Government Act of 1978. The entire goal at that juncture was really to impose financial disclosures. They wanted the interested parties and public servants at that point to be able to disclose their financial interests, so the public would have an idea whether they were serving in the best interest of the public or sort of lining their own pockets with the decisions that they were making. And out of Watergate, most states, there's still some outliers that don't have an ethics commission, but most states and many local jurisdictions enacted their own version of this Ethics and Government Act. And Nevada's law originated in 1975. Again, the original scope of ethics laws really had to do with financial disclosures. But as things developed in ethics laws, they realized that the complexity and the sophistication and diversity of financial interests was so complex that a simple financial disclosure was essentially ill-equipped to provide the transparency that was originally intended. And so out of that frame of mind became this sort of expansion of ethics laws into what we now refer to essentially as ethical standards of conduct that are applicable to our public officers and our public employees. The premise behind this expansion was, in essence, back to the mission. This is a public service. It's a public trust. We're not to be engaging in activities on behalf of the public that are for our own private interests. And so we wanted to ensure that our public officials and public employees were acting impartially, that we were protecting government property and resources from personal use, that we weren't engaging in inappropriate outside employment that would conflict with official duties. And of course, things like protecting government resources and interests from waste, fraud, abuse, and all of those things. So what's interesting is, since 1975, we've had this real evolution in ethics laws. And what is most concerning to an agency like ours at the Ethics Commission is when we see studies come out, and they're across the board, but this one stood out to us from the Pew Research Center, which indicated that there was really essentially a historic low in the public's trust in government. At the federal government level, this study showed that 20% of Americans, had low trust in government, expected that our public officials would do the right thing only 2% of the time. And we take a look at these types of studies, not because they're necessarily equal to what's going on in Nevada, but really because it emphasizes for the Ethics Commission, not only our mission, but is there something we could be doing better? Is there something we could communicate differently? To ensure that the public has more faith and transparency in what we're doing on their behalf. And so in that vein, there have been a lot of integrity studies that have been conducted. The Coalition on Integrity has year after year conducted a study that ranks states against one another in terms of its many things actually, but in 2019, they did a specific study on ethics, enforcement, and transparency. And the state of Nevada ranked 8th. And I thought that was a tremendous accomplishment for Nevada to rank that high in terms of our enforcement and transparency. And what's ironic about ranking 8th in 2019 was the fact that they looked at data from 2018 because our fiscal year 19 data hadn't come out yet. And interestingly enough, in fiscal year 19, we saw more than a doubling of our caseload, both on the advisory and complaint side. And I thought we saw a really tremendous, a lot of growth in fiscal year 19. So I would have imagined that our ranking even would have been higher had they looked at those statistics back in 2019. Up to fiscal year 20, we got a new study that came out with fiscal year study. It again looked at ethics commissions across the board and ethics laws. And on all of those same categories, the Nevada Commission on Ethics ranked just as high as it did in 2019. The next study, however, implemented some other review of some other issues with campaign and elections and multi-agency factors. And Nevada came out with a 21 ranking amongst all the states in fiscal year 20. So I'm still encouraged by the outcome with the ethics questions that were asked in those studies, which really relate back to enforcement, transparency, whistleblower protections, and things of that nature, which I still find very encouraging. So essentially, I think what we're seeing in government today is really a re-emergence of ethics laws. So most ethics laws, including the creation of them, were created 40 years ago. And so today, I think there's a big emphasis on restoring the public's trust in government and where are we going to go from here? And we've seen some interesting highlights in this area. I noticed from your previous presenter that they noted HR 1. That's a new bill that's coming out in the House of Representatives. It's their first bill for the new Congress. And one of the aspects of that bill is to strengthen the ethics rule for all public servants. And I think that that really speaks volumes that this was a bill that they put forward in the last Congress. They're re-putting it forward this year to hopefully pass, with another emphasis on ethics laws, conflict of interest issues, disclosures, financial interests, and so forth. We also see Senate Rule 1 in the new Congress coming up, which is going to deal with ethical conduct rules for the Senate. And I think that that's highlighting the importance of ethics and again, rebuilding that public trust in government. One of the bills that you're going to see, I'm just going to give you a teaser because we'll obviously have a bill hearing on these issues, but we're going to have AB 65 that we're going to propose to the legislature this year. And the real emphasis in the commission's thought process in putting forward this bill was really to encourage additional due process, emphasize some whistleblower protections, as well as some other procedural issues that we'll be happy to share with you during the bill hearings or certainly in response to any questions you might have today. So again, just a brief overview. The entire mission of the Nevada Commission on Ethics is really to enhance public's trust in government, to ensure that our public officers and public employees commit to avoiding conflicts of interest between their public duties and their private interests. And in that vein, the commission really has fairly broad jurisdiction, but I thought it would be an opportunity here today to really explain what that jurisdiction is. So the commission's jurisdiction is written as oversight for purposes of the ethics and government law over all public officers and public employees in the state of Nevada. So at the state level, all the way down to our local governments. There are several exceptions. The first exception, of course, are our judicial officers. Our judicial officers in this state are governed by the Nevada Commission on Judicial Discipline, and they also have an advisory standing committee that assists judges and officers of the courts with questions for advice. We also have a lot, mostly on the local level, but we have a lot of public entities in this state that serve as advisory bodies. And so members of these advisory bodies who don't have final decision-making authority, who are essentially making recommendations to those bodies who do make decisions, are not deemed to be public officers under the definition set forth in our chapter. And of course, third, are state legislators. The scope of the Ethics Commission's jurisdiction over state legislators is limited. So to the extent a state legislator is engaging in a core legislative function or conduct that's otherwise protected by legislative privilege and immunity, that conduct is going to be governed by your own respective House ethics committees. We've seen, I'll just provide a kind of a brief evolution. The Nevada Commission on Ethics has been reinstituted a couple of times here. Again, we were initiated or enacted rather in 1975. In 1976, there was a Supreme Court decision came out and said that the ethics law was unconstitutional because of a financial provision that was deemed to be vague. So the legislature reenacted the ethics law and clarified those financial disclosure requirements in 1977. In 1977, interestingly enough, the legislature enacted two separate ethics commissions. They enacted a legislative ethics commission and an executive branch ethics commission. What they found at that time was that both of those commissions were rarely meeting, they weren't funded, and they weren't as effective as they had hoped. So they came back, the legislature came back in 1985 and created again the single ethics commission, funded it so that it would be accessible and available to provide advisory opinions, to interpret and enforce the ethics law, and to review complaints that would come in. And of course, I think what's really important and what I just want to emphasize here a little bit is there became a question about what was the distinction in the role with the Legislative House Ethics Committees versus the Nevada Commission on Ethics with regard to state legislators. And for purposes of better understanding, there is a state constitutional provision in the state of Nevada that specifically says essentially separation of powers issues. And I don't want to get too much into the legalese here, but it allowed for each branch of government to essentially govern their own conduct. And in 2009, the Nevada Supreme Court took a look at this in the Commission on Ethics versus Hardy decision. And that was the decision that clarified for purposes of the jurisdiction of the Ethics Commission that we would not have jurisdiction to oversee issues that related to core legislative functions. And the most obvious examples of that are clearly what you're doing here in the legislature. You're voting on issues, you're introducing legislation, speech and debate, all of those things are core to the legislative function. And therefore, if there are allegations or concerns or requests for advice by your own members, those would go to the respective House ethics committees. And then in 2015, we saw AB 496, which codified the principles of legislative privilege and immunity and protected both state legislators and your staff from allegations of violations of ethics laws that at least would go again to your own respective house if it was an issue protected by legislative privilege and immunity. I just highlight here on this next slide, a few of the legislative house rules that apply to you. Certainly that is not up for the commission to interpret or apply, but I did note that I saw earlier this week that you did pass your new standing rule 23 and your joint standing rules on ethics. And so if there are questions about that, I certainly would wish to defer to your own legislative counsel for issues with respect to that out of deference to them. Okay, so again, this is just a highlight from your own rule. Legislators' private interests are defined in your rules to include your acceptance of gifts or loans, private economic or financial interests, and commitments to members of your immediate household. All right, and I think I alluded to earlier, of course, that judges, again, officers of the court are going to defer to the Nevada Commission on Judicial Discipline or the Standing Committee on Judicial Ethics for their advice and enforcement, and the standards of conduct that are going to apply to judges, separate and distinct from the standards that we have under our law, are going to be the judicial canons. All right, a bit of an overview here. The Nevada Commission on Ethics is essentially responsible for four primary functions. The first is, and most important to the commission, is our outreach and education. Much like we're providing this presentation to you today, what we are responsible for statutorily and otherwise is to provide this type of outreach to all of our public officers and employees throughout the state. We do that regularly in as many venues as possible, most of the time by invitation, but also we're attempting to adapt to this virtual world, and we're trying to provide these types of presentations and access to trainings on our website as well. The second function is our advisory function. This is a process whereby any public officer or employee can seek the confidential advice of the commission regarding their own conduct. Typically that comes in the form of, number one, does this circumstance present a conflict of interest for me? And if it does, is it disqualifying, or is there some other action that can be undertaken to either avoid the conflict or overcome it in some sense? And the third function we perform is our enforcement arm. This is the investigatory and adjudicatory process of the Ethics Commission, whereby members of the public can file ethics complaints alleging that there's been a violation of the ethics law by a public officer or a public employee. And this will trigger a number of procedural steps before the commission, including its staff, to determine, number one, whether it's sufficient to even warrant an investigation. And two, if there is an investigation that's required, that investigation will be confidential until it proceeds to a determination by a 3-member panel of our commission to ascertain whether the evidence discovered during an investigation is sufficient to go forward for adjudication. And then finally, for our public officers out there, much like yourselves, and thank you to those of you that got them on file, we do collect acknowledgement of statutory ethical standards forms. So for our public officers who are elected, this form needs to be on file on or before January 15th after an election. And we have different timelines for those those public officers who are appointed. I thought it might be a good opportunity here to show you some trends in our statistics. The first one is our outreach and education program. What I alluded to in terms of our program has really been the executive director's responsibility to travel throughout the state to provide presentations on the ethics in government law, in particular, more the merits, less so what I'm doing here today, which is an overview, and more getting into the merits of the ethics laws, what they mean and how they apply. And so you'll see here a trend slightly downward. We've historically noticed lesser trainings during legislative years, but I think the trend for fiscal year 20 and 21 is really attributable to COVID. We certainly had the requests that were out there, and I think what we've now been able to do is adapt to this virtual world, and we'll be providing that outreach and education virtually for the foreseeable future. Again, our advisory opinions, just a quick highlight, they are confidential. What ends up happening with an advisory opinion is that there's either a written submission to the commission, or the commission can conduct a hearing to render this advice. But all of these requests for advisory opinion, they do result in formal written opinions that are prepared by the commission counsel. So these aren't just, one-page documents. These are sometimes 10, 20, 30-page opinions that really vet the circumstances. And they do provide precedent for the commission going forward. So the idea is that we publish them. If they're confidential, we publish an abstract of them so that they can serve as advice for other people who might be similarly situated. Again, I've provided you some statistics here that sort of show the trajectory of the number of advisory opinions that we've received, the number we're reviewing and vetting, and we saw a significant uptick in the number of requests for advisory opinion during fiscal year 20. So I find that encouraging, obviously, because we always want to see advice coming in rather than enforcement. So the thought is that it's promising that we're seeing advisory opinions, but it's also a highlight for us that, outreach and education is certainly going to be a priority. And also there are a number of individuals who have questions about the applicability of the ethics law who might be confronted with these conflicts. And so ideally, we'll be able to have that type of outreach as we go forward. A little bit about AB 65, just a teaser here about what we're thinking of trying to do with respect to advisory resources. One thing that the commission has experienced, not unlike every other agency in government with respect to COVID, is some challenging issues. The first of which is that there is a statutory deadline for the commission to issue these advisory opinions. And with resources being as they are, we thought one opportunity that really could open up for our public officers and public employees out there is to allow the commission's executive director and commission counsel to provide informal advice to individuals. That advice, of course, would be required to be consistent with commission precedent, subject to review by the commission, and of course the commission's opinions are subject to judicial review. The thought here was that we get a lot of calls on a daily basis. There might be a public official who has a meeting that evening, wants some advice about whether they have a disclosure and abstention obligation. And typically what we'll have to say is, we can't give legal advice. You can request an advisory opinion, or we can refer them to a potential opinion that might be applicable, but sometimes they just want a little bit more coverage than that. And we thought this could be a great resource for the public. With ethics complaints, again, what we're really looking at here is alleged conduct that's in contravention of our ethical standards of conduct. Might be in contravention of prohibited government contracts, failures to disclose and abstain, and we see cooling off violations as our primary issues for enforcement. We've again provided an interesting chart here that shows our statistics of the number of complaints. What I think is interesting, fiscal year 19 was the first time that we started to worry. We're really seeing more than a doubling of our caseload on the complaint side from fiscal year 19, and 18 reflects what we were seeing in prior years. So we saw a short fall in fiscal year 20 as a result of COVID, I think, but we provided the first 3 quarter statistics, which was pre-COVID, occurring during that time frame. And so we really were seeing the same trajectory that we thought we would experience in fiscal year 19 until things shut down with COVID. But the more interesting statistic there, I think, is despite the number of complaints received, the commission is accepting jurisdiction and directing investigations of a good portion more. So we have a significant portion of ongoing investigations, and you'll see fiscal year 20, there were 48 active investigations, some from those received that year, and of course, some that carry over from prior years. So we're definitely seeing a high number of cases that are being investigated by commission staff. General overview of our complaint procedures. I don't want to bog you down in that, but generally speaking, our statutes really govern our filing methods, the process by which the commission determines whether it has jurisdiction and whether there is sufficient evidence to warrant an investigation. If that jurisdiction is accepted and we do conduct an investigation, those investigations are confidential. They result in a recommendation to what's known as a review panel. It's 3 members of our commission. They're on rotating, alternating assignments to these panels, so it's never the same panel. This panel is going to decide whether the evidence is sufficient to go forward, whether there's insufficient evidence, or whether the conduct at issue is appropriate for a deferral agreement, which means not referred for adjudication, and we can enter into some sort of terms and conditions for corrective action short of finding violations and imposing other penalties. Our panel determinations are the first instance in which a complaint case would become public. And in those circumstances in which a case proceeds to adjudication, that is a public proceeding. Typically, it is exempt from open meeting law for purposes of the proceedings and the deliberations. But any final action that the commission would take would be taken in an open public meeting with regard to any findings of violations or imposition of penalties. The types of civil penalties that are outlined in our statutes include any type of corrective or remedial action. We mandate ethics training in certain circumstances. We can impose mandates for public apologies or various public admonishments and censures. And we can also put certain conditions on future conduct. But when it comes to willful violations, this is a separate assessment that the commission must make about whether the conduct is so egregious that it warrants a financial sanction. And in our statutes currently, a first willful violation could not exceed $5,000, for a second willful, not more than $10,000, and for a third, not more than $25,000. A bit of a clarification here too comes with respect to any authority the commission might have to remove a public officer or public employee. We do not have that independent authority to remove a public officer or a public employee from office. We have statutory obligation. It's a mandate under certain circumstances to refer individuals for removal. So if it's a state constitutional officer or a legislator, for example, over an issue which we would have authority, that would be referred to the legislature for impeachment proceedings. for local government officials, and otherwise there's a malfeasance system in place where we would refer that to the appropriate court for its consideration, rather, whether removal was appropriate. Last but not least, I think we're getting close here to the end. I really want to emphasize this safe harbor provision that we have in our law. This is existing law. Under existing law, the legislature has determined that it's appropriate for our public officers and public employees to reasonably rely on the legal advice that they're given by the lawyers who serve those agencies. The commission views this as an asset. So in other words, we're in partnership with the public attorneys in the various agencies to assist us in giving advice about ethics and government law. The Commission on Ethics, the turnaround time to get advice from the commission can be lengthy. A lot of times these issues are coming up on the fly in the middle of a meeting, and our public officials and employees need to be able to get this advice in a timely manner. So the legislature, this has been in the law for a long time. They've concluded that if there's reasonable reliance on that attorney, then the commission cannot find a willful violation of the ethics law. Now, I note that distinction of willfulness. The question we often get is, well, so I can be construed to have violated the law and have other lesser penalties imposed, and currently the answer is yes. The commission's really taken a look at this issue, and in AB 65 wants to propose extending the safe harbor protections for all violations, not just willful. So by that, we really want our public officials and public employees to be able to rely upon the legal advice of the agency attorneys. Certainly agency attorneys will get it wrong sometimes. They may not interpret it the same way as the commission, but if these individuals are seeking that advice, they're getting it before they act, then we want them to be able to rely on that short of a finding of a violation by the Ethics Commission. The commission may still interpret the circumstances differently and issue an opinion, but it won't impose a penalty in those circumstances. Again, I wanted to highlight, we've had some really interesting cases over the last 2 years that have resulted in some pretty hefty sanctions from the Ethics Commission. In fact, they're somewhat historical monetary sanctions that the Ethics Commission has imposed in the last few years. So a total amount of sanctions from fiscal year 19 was approximately $40,000. And in current fiscal year, we've already imposed about $45,000 in penalties for misconduct. And so that money, when sanctions are imposed, it is deposited into the state general fund. It does not come back into the Ethics Commission's budget. And so we're seeing some interesting trends in terms of the type of conduct that we've seen that's warranted willful sanctions. All right, so just another sort of highlight here. We're talking on the substantive side about conflicts of interest between public duties and private interests. Really boils down to a misuse of one's government position for a private purpose. And in that vein, we have two types of private interests that are going to trigger conflicts for our public officials. That's going to be financial interests and relationship-based conflicts. So this list of relationships is the definition set forth in NRS 281A.065 that defines the types of relationships that could potentially create conflicts. And what that means is that if the interests of those individuals come before us in our public capacity, we potentially have a conflict. Now, again, it won't always be a disqualifying conflict, but we have to recognize that when these individuals come before us, we have such close personal relationships with them, we have the potential for a conflict. Highbrow level of our standards of conduct, we can't accept improper gifts. We can't misuse our positions to obtain or grant unwarranted benefits. There are limitations on government contracts. We can't misuse or suppress non-public government information or improperly influence our subordinates or misuse government property, as well as our cooling. Disclosure and abstention. This applies, of course, not only to our public officers, but also to public employees. We don't want our public employees any more so than we want the members of our governing bodies to be acting in their official capacities in a manner that affects their private interests. So disclosure is going to be to the supervisory head of an organization if it's a public employee. If it's a governing body member, it's going to be a disclosure to the public in a public meeting when an agenda item is called. And a disclosure is really going to be for any matter that affects these interests that we've already described. Abstention, on the other hand, or what we often refer to as recusal or disqualification, really should only be occurring in those clear cases in which there's a material effect on our private interests. And so we have to recognize that when we're telling public officials they can't vote on issues, that's a very significant decision. The theory, the legislative history behind that is we don't want to divest the public of their representative voice in government. So we're only going to mandate these in the most clear cases of absolute material conflicts. Sometimes these are judgment calls, and that's of course why we have our advisory function. That's why we have our attorneys to represent us in these areas. And most of our opinions, in fact, really do boil down to this disclosure abstention distinction. Cooling off, quick overview. There's a 1-year timeout for certain public officers and public employees who wish to leave their public service and work in the private sector. The two primary areas are in the regulated industries and where we have vendor contracts. We don't want our regulated government servants to leave their government position and go work for the regulated entity or industry within that 1 year for certain positions. We also don't want individuals who are influential in awarding contracts to vendors to be able to award the contract and leave their government position and go work for that vendor within that 1 year. We took an interesting look. We got a lot of feedback last couple of years about the applicability of our cooling off laws. A lot of consensus came to the table to request that we limit the applicability of the cooling off provisions to essentially management level employees. We didn't want to capture rank and file employees. We really wanted to capture those who are instrumental in making decisions or who are charged with policy decisions, administration of these regulated entities. And so we agreed to put forward that measure. And then the other thing we saw, I think you might have seen my statistic for advisory opinions on the 41 advisory opinions that we received in fiscal year 20. I can't recall off the top of my head, my apologies, but it was more than a majority of those 41 opinions came from public employees and public officers who were requesting relief from the commission to go work for a vendor of their agency. And the law as it currently stands says that someone who is instrumental in awarding the contract cannot then go and work for the vendor. What it doesn't capture, and what a lot of the facts really portrayed to us in these advisory opinions, was that these individuals were nevertheless instrumental in administering the contracts, managing those contracts, and then leaving and going and working directly for those vendors. And so as a simple interpretation, if they weren't instrumental in awarding the contract, they were granted that relief, or not necessarily relief, but we determined that the statute didn't apply. So we're going to propose this year for your consideration whether or not we should be capturing also those employees who are instrumental in managing or administering those contracts. And with that, I just would like to conclude on a very general overview that we'll be presenting to you this year in AB 65, other than what I've already highlighted here for you, is that we've certainly seen the cost to our agency of the COVID related issues. The biggest one of which is that we have multiple statutory deadlines set forth in our statutes, and they're very difficult to achieve, not just because of emergency COVID circumstances, but also because of the nature of complaints and advisory issues that have come before the commission. We simply need more time and appropriate circumstances to be able to address these issues. So we're looking at streamlining some of our processing, requesting some extensions of times, looking at preliminary investigations so we don't have to get into a full-blown investigation if there's no what we call sort of there. We're really focused on some due process enhancements in terms of the statutory requirements for notices and discovery. We want to enhance our complaint or whistleblower protections. Right now, Nevada sits uniquely amongst a lot of states in that we do allow requesters to keep their identity confidential if they are alleging conduct against someone within their own agency. The hiccup here is really just simply human error, right? Because the ethics law says we have to provide a copy of the complaint to the subject. Sometimes we don't redact everything properly, or sometimes someone's handwriting is inadvertently in there and it gives away the identity of the requester. So we're going to prepare more formal notices, ideally with the legislature's support there. Again, we have a few other highlights here. Just we want to ensure that our public officers and employees are cooperating in investigations. 90% of the witnesses to the allegations we're dealing with are colleagues of public officers and public employees, and we need their help to ascertain what's going on. And with that, I guess one more highlight, my apologies. I want to also emphasize what ethics law is not. There's a lot of misconception out there, presumably because of the word ethics. We do not govern campaign finance and election law. As you saw from your prior presenter, that's governed by the Secretary of State's office. We also don't govern policy decisions. It's not our job to come in and second guess decisions that are being made by governing bodies or different agencies. We get a lot of questions about that, or calls, right? We disagree with this decision. It's unethical. You guys ought to go investigate that. Well, that's simply not our role. We're only going to be concerned about those policy decisions if they're made because of a private interest or to affect a private interest. And while it seems a bit silly, things like rude behavior and laziness are calls we get a lot, but clearly that's not going to rise to the level of oversight by the Ethics Commission. And on a more serious note, the sexual harassment questions and the workplace discrimination, those are just more properly vetted by agencies like the Nevada Equal Rights Commission.
Director?
I've provided our contact information here, and I'd be happy to take any questions that the members may have.
Thank you, Director Gibson. I'm just checking to see, looking through some of our list. Members, do we have any questions? Chair Ornshaw?
Thank you very much, Chair Miller. And more of a comment, I just wanted to compliment Ms. Navarez-Goodson. I know she's worked so hard to improve our standing among the states on our ethics laws, and been great to work collaboratively with you, certainly chairing this committee last session and then being in Chair Miller's seat when I had the great honor to chair the Assembly Committee on Elections. So appreciate all your hard work on these issues. And no, as you mentioned, it's been a long road since the 1970s, the first election, our ethics laws, and going back and forth, but just wanted to compliment all your hard work. Thank you, Chair Miller.
Indeed. Thank you. Any other questions from any other members? We're just not seeing any other questions, which is also a nice sign of a thorough presentation. I would again like to thank you, Director Goodson, and of course, Commission Counsel Tracy Chase, that is also participating. And not seeing any other questions, I would like to close this agenda item. And we'll move on to our next agenda item, which is public comment. And so with the public comment, we will be limiting public comment to 30 minutes. As previously mentioned, those who wish to provide public comment are directed to pre-register online so that they have an opportunity. A few of our housekeeping mentions are, again, that testimony during public comment is limited to 2 minutes per person. Remarks should address issues that fall within the jurisdiction of this committee. And of course, we already appreciate and thank everyone for being respectful and courteous to all. Also, written remarks may also be submitted for inclusion in the meeting records. With that, I will turn things over to BPS to facilitate those who have registered and called in to make a public comment. So BPS, if there's anyone on the line that would like to comment.
Yes, we have a couple callers on there. I will invite the first one in.
Thank you.
Hello, caller with the last three digits 052. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Yes, if there's anyone on the line that would like to comment.
Yes, we have a couple callers on there. I will. Hello, caller. You are live. You have 2 minutes.
Okay, thank you. My name, for the record, is Darla Lee. Can you hear?
With the last three digits 052.
We can hear you.
Yes. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record.
Okay.
2 minutes.
Darla, yes, Darla, D-A-R-L-A, Lee, L-E-E, and I am calling tonight to support Senator Buck and to support fair and safe and clean elections.
Hello, caller. You are live. You have 2 minutes.
I am speaking. Okay, my name, for the record, is Darla Lee. Can you hear?
Ma'am, I think maybe if you were to turn
Yes.
off your screen, you wouldn't hear the echo.
Oh, okay.
Because I think you're hearing through the echo.
Okay, is this better?
Yes, much better. Thank you.
Yes.
Is this, oh, okay, fine. Sorry about that. So the Nevada Democrats passed AB 4 in the middle of the night and ignored public comment. So it is very disturbing to hear that the presentation that everything was absolutely perfect with this past election, because there was so much that has been refused to be investigated of documented criminal behavior in regards to the November election. And for example, AB 4 sent out, was allowed to be sent out, and this is by the person speaking earlier, over 100,000 of ballots to bad addresses, which cost the state millions of dollars. And Secretary Chavasky has had access to at least 8,000 pages of evidence submitted in the Electoral College lawsuit. So why aren't you legislators looking at these affidavits which document witnessing voter fraud in the election? And I would like to know, how did thousands of non-citizens vote in Nevada as shown by their DMV subpoena data? Also, why are there still deceased people on the voter rolls? Because if it's such a daily thing that they are being taken off, why are there still so many, as evidenced in the last election, of these deceased people, non-citizens, and non-residents still on our voter rolls? I think you folks have a lot to do to actually provide us with a clean and safe election.
But ma'am, that has been your 2 minutes. Thank you so much.
Yes,
Anything else?
I'm finished. Thank you.
Thank you. Next caller, please. Or BPS, is there a next caller?
There is. We have about 7, so I will jump into the next one.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Caller with the last 3 digits 527. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin. I'm going to try that again. That didn't seem to work. Caller with the last three digits, 527. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Hi, my name is Kimberly Fergus, Kimberly, F as in Frank, ERGUS, and I am calling in support of Senator Buck for her fight for clean and fraud and for her clean elections. I'm sorry, I'm kind of tongue-tied from trying to watch the YouTube and do this at the same time. However, why are we even going down this route? I've been, and I have in my possession affidavits and I've tried to give them to the Secretary of State. She refuses to answer why she won't accept any of these sworn affidavits. I personally have talked people off the ledge of wanting to commit suicide because they're losing their voice to fair elections. That's all we have left in this country is fair elections. And I have people, one person, one family, he's been here 30 years, registered to vote, same address. He went to go vote, and all of a sudden, he had to do a provisional ballot. And then I called the Clark County Elections Department, and I said, why are you making provisional ballots only vote for the president? I said, these people have lived here 30 years. Well, we came to that conclusion. I said, what do you mean you came to that conclusion? Well, we thought it would be fair. This is wrong. I'm sorry if I really totally got off script, but I mean, listen, you guys, I was there when AB 4 passed in the middle of the night. There was 4,000 public comments. I stood up all night, made public comments on the phone, wrote and stuff like that.
Your 2 minutes is up. So any further comments?
All right, I just would like to, I would just like to say thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. We're BPS for our next caller.
Yes. Caller with the last three digits, 842. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin. Oh, let me try that again. Caller with the last three digits, 842. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Hi, this is David Gibbs, DavidGibbs. I know you guys are just getting started, and I heard the two previous callers. My issue is that, in 2018 and before, our elections were determined pretty much on election night. All right, we know who voted, and we counted all the ballots, and the decisions were final, with a few exceptions because of the closeness of the races and counting absentee ballots. We all saw the chaos that happened last year. And a lot of that was due to the laws that you guys passed in 2019 and 2020. And I think you need to relook those. I think you need to relook the fact that ballots in the past had to be accepted by the close of the polls. Now you're accepting ballots so much later. Mail-in ballots, you're allowing postmarks. If it's unsure what the postmark says, then you're accepting the fact that the ballot was postmarked before the close of election. That created some uncertainty. A couple of other things that came up that I think you need to take a look at. I can't speak for the other counties, but here in Clark County, when I voted in person, I had 100% verification of my signature before I was given a ballot. Had I voted for mail, I only had a 40% requirement. I think that's an unequal application of the law. You either verify the signature or you don't. I think that's something that you guys need to take a look at. Obviously, there's been a lot of discussion about the lists, but the longer that it takes the state to validate and verify the election, the more uncertainty it creates among the electorate. And that's something that you need to take a look at because the electorate has to have confidence in the entire process not just the balloting, but also the counting and the timeliness of it all. So as you guys conduct your business, I think you need to consider those items. Thank you.
Thank you. BPS, do we have another caller?
Yes, we do. I will get them on the line. Caller with the last 3 digits, 903. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. I'll have 2 minutes and may begin. Hello, caller with the last 3 digits, 903. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record.
Yes, hello. My name is Alita Benson, and I am calling in to support the fight for clean elections. Every single Nevadan has an interest in clean elections and ensuring that each voter only gets one vote. This is not a partisan stance. Any politician who thinks that any amount of voter fraud is acceptable should have a higher level of scrutiny applied to their own campaigns. I am concerned that so far, the Secretary of State and this committee have not followed up on the following incidents. First, in AB 4, legalized assisted signatures, which allows ballots to be completed on behalf of those 65 and older and those who are incapacitated. So far, only Eureka County has complied with public records requests and reporting for ballot completion. How many ballots were signed by another person that were not reported or investigated? All Nevadans should stand against the abuse of our seniors, and I hope that this committee stands with us. There is video evidence of vote buying on every Native American reservation in Nevada that's documented on video. This is a felony per NRS 293.700, bribery of an elector. Why has the state not done anything about this? It is publicly available and was submitted to the FBI, who the Secretary of State says that she works with. Finally, Rosemarie Hartle lost her life to breast cancer in 2017, and someone stole her mail-in ballot, filled it out, and that fraudulent vote was counted. That canceled out our votes. And what are you doing about it? How many fraudulent votes should we accept? I say none. I thank the committee for their time, and I encourage each member to do the right thing. Clean elections are bipartisan, and Nevada did not have a clean election. Be better and bigger than your party and say no amount of voter fraud is acceptable.
Thank you. BPS, our next caller.
Yes. Caller with the last 3 digits, 940. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Hi, my name is Carolina Serrano, last name Serrano, and I'm calling in support of election integrity. So when voter fraud hits close to home, it just hits a bit different. I went through hundreds of affidavits, and one of them in particular caught my eye because it had my brother's name on it. I looked closely. It had his old address. And when I looked through the data center, sure enough, somebody had voted for him with a mail-in ballot. I knew that he voted in person. I let him know his vote was provisional and it was never counted. I do want to go back to the gentleman's presentation where he talked about election integrity becoming more complex. And I have to say that the reason why it's becoming more complex is because the safeguards are being taken away. It's very simple to vote. It's one vote, one person. Show up with your ID as an American citizen and cast your vote. That's all I have to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you. BPS, do we have another caller?
Yes, we do. Caller with the last 3 digits, 112. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin. I'm going to try that one more time. Caller with the last 3 digits, 112. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and you may begin. I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next caller. Caller with the last three digits 050. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin now. Caller with the last three digits 050. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin. All right, I have one more caller to try. I will try them. Caller with the last three digits 319. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin. Caller with the last three digits 319. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes. Begin.
My name is Melissa Clement, MELISSACLEMENT. I live in Reno, and I'm calling to register my concern with the most recent elections. A fair and honest vote is protected very simply. Transparency, bipartisanship, consistent application of rules, and common sense are imperative when planning and executing an election. A fair election requires also that only those who are legally able to vote, vote. In the atmosphere of the pandemic, all this went out the window. Nevada had a robust and fair means to provide voter access through its existing absentee ballot system prior to the 2020 primary and general elections. The Nevada Legislature passed AB 4 with little input from anyone in the middle of the night with very little notice. You know, my father passed away June 9th, ironically, the day of the Nevada primary, for which he had cast an absentee ballot a week prior. His death was recorded at the Washoe County Health District Vital Records Department, located at 1001 East 9th Street, Building B, first floor. Months later, he received his ballot for the general election from Washoe County Voter Registrar, located at 1001 East 9th Street, Building A, first floor, a 1-minute walk or a nanosecond via computer. Yet somehow that info did not make it to the registrar of voters. Fortunately, my brother and I secured his ballot and made sure no one voted it. I went online every day after the election to make sure that no one, having seen his obituary in the paper, showed up to vote using his name. But not every bereaved family thinks of this. As a previous caller already mentioned, the woman with breast cancer, she died, and then somebody voted her ballot, along with 1,506 other known people who were dead who voted in 2020. One illegal vote cast canceled out my vote. Thousands obliterated my voice. How many fraudulent votes should we accept? I say none. Thank you for your concern and fixing this problem.
Thank you. BPS, was that the last caller?
Chair, we can go back to the two callers that had trouble, and that's the only two that we have left.
Okay, great. Thank you.
All right, I'll give one last try on each of these and see if they work. Caller with the last three digits 112. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin. Okay, I'll move on to the last caller.
And I'll just say while you're getting with the next caller that again, because I'm hoping they can hear me, that they can always submit their comments as well.
Caller with the last three digits 050. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin. Chair, the comment line is open and working, but we have no more callers at this time.
Okay, thank you so much. And I know that, I appreciate you going back to ensure that everyone who intends has an opportunity to speak and be heard. And we have allotted, enough time, especially between individuals. So at this point, I would like to ask members of our committees before we adjourn if there's any additional comments. Okay, seeing no additional comments, then this concludes our meeting for today. Our next meeting will be Tuesday, February 9th at 4 p.m. again as a joint committee meeting. And this time, Chair Orenshaw will be leading us. So with that, thank you so much. And this meeting is adjourned.